So we're recording. So I'm here with my guest, Aaron Lopresti, creator of Garbage Man, Wraith of God. There we go. Wraith of God Blood Hunters, and Fantastical Creatures, field guide and where to find and draw them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You got
So,
me covered.
yeah, at least your independent stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
that's the most important stuff these days. So,
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to share the screen. Uh, Hold on a second.
sure. I should have cleaned up my studio before this, but I guess like they say, like what the messy desk is the sign of a genius. So I don't know what a
Yeah.
messy room is the sign of, but
Yeah. Let me get off my email first before I share my screen. That might be a good idea. Oh, there we go. Mm, Technical difficulties. All right.
have them myself many times a day.
Yep. That's partly why we're not live streaming. So I get the
Go in
feel. I
and
was like,
edit a little bit.
yes. Well, I'm going to add an intro to this, but so this is your campaign, Wraith of God 3 Fear Hollow. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, this is the third installment of the Wraith of God series. The Wraith is a character that believes that he's had a vision from God that's instructing him to go out and basically hunt monsters and rid the land, the American Western landscape of 1883 of monsters and evil. And he has enlisted the aid of Esther, who was a Salvation Army worker, and he's sort of manipulated her into becoming his partner, and so that they have this sort of contentious relationship that is, that we focus on every story, and that's evolving, and of course, every episode they have some monsters or creatures that they have to hunt down. In this case, it's the headless horseman, and there's also a witch that's involved in this that's controlling the headless horseman. But there's also a villain from his past that is kind of pulling the strings behind all of this. We got a brief intro to him in Wraith of God Blood Hunters, a little two-page segment of this character, and we're going to start building that up as we go along. So he'll be appearing in this as well. But a lot of we're going to get into the Wraith's past, a lot of what um, kind of shaped him as a young man or as a kid, really, and and the ties that he has with this headless horseman character, and so there's going to be a lot of action, but there's also going to be this kind of we're going to develop more of his character and his backstory in this as well. So I'm really excited for this one. I think it has potential to be the best one yet. So I'm still
I'm
working on the
excited.
script, so we'll see. But
I'm
I'm very
excited for
excited about it. And it launches.
it.
It's going to launch in about a week. So it'll launch next week. This is still the early sign up period. So you go to Indiegogo, type in your email address, and that puts you on the mailing list and makes you eligible to get a free exclusive trading card with your first order. So, and the only way you can get that is by signing up early. So that's my pitch.
I'm excited for this one too.
There you go.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with the Headless Horseman.
No, I don't think you can. Someone had I'm constantly getting people, oh, you should do this monster, you should do this monster. And someone had brought up a long time ago the headless horseman, and I started at first I thought, well, what am I going to do with that? And I started thinking about it, and I was able to actually make it it actually helped me fill in some of the blanks of how I was going to tell the Wraith's backstory, and it just kind of fit in like a glove. And so
Nice.
I'm so yeah, keep the suggestions coming.
It's nice when those inspirations happen.
Yeah, because it is. You can sit there and say, well, do I want to do a swamp monster? Do I want to do a Frankenstein monster? What about zombies? And you start thinking, well, what could basically tie in to the character more deeply than just, having a story that's just them hunting down a monster? What can I add? How can I layer this story? And that's sort of what came together for me with this the Headless Horseman concept. And I'm a big fan of the story. I love the Disney version, and there was actually a movie
Yeah, Sleepy
starring.
Hollow.
Yeah, well, no, before that, before the Tim
Oh,
Burton one, which I also saw, but there was one with Jeff Goldblum where he played
oh,
Ichabod Crane way back when I think I was in high school, came out. And I remember going to see that too. So it's a really it's a great character, has a lot of
mm,
uh, history to it. So it's not something that is unrecognizable to people. So you say Headless Horseman, and you're going to get a reaction from people because almost everybody has experienced it at some level,
mhm.
in literature or TV or movies. So
Yeah. Yeah, and then I also have your official website pulled up. So if anyone wants to find your books, they're right over here in the store.
yeah,
And
um I had for months this I had closed down my old website and was trying to get this one built, the new one. But I just had not, I was so focused on the books I was doing that it was like, I just kept getting pushed to the side, pushed to the side. And I
mhm,
was like, when you end up with after a campaign and you have extra inventory, you're like, well, what am I going to do with it? And so
yeah,
I finally, kicked myself in the butt and said, get this thing done because you can get your books listed up there and the prints and everything extra listed up there. And so I finally reached out to my web guy, said we need to design a new one, got him going on it. And I've been pretty consistent about adding more stuff to it. 'Cause I still have more stuff that I want to put on there that I have to get images for, and I even started listing my original art, which is really a chore when you have to start inventorying every single page that you have.
yeah,
Um, and it's sort of those are one of those things that you can easily talk yourself out of because you're like, do I really want to scan 100 pieces of artwork?
mhm,
But I've been pretty good in the last few months of trying to prioritize this and make sure that it's updated. And the more stuff that I come out with or have available, that it gets listed. And so and it's nice. It's, I can't design all this stuff. I just, hire a guy to do it. And I'm real happy with the functionality of it. But it still looks, modern and cool, but it's not that hard to navigate. So
yeah. Like I can function it, so it works pretty well.
that's my test, right? If I can do it, then anybody can do it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. All right, so I think that'll end the commercial side of this.
okay.
Now, now we'll get back into the interview side.
Okay.
So I am going to, sorry, trying to make this function.
That's all
But
right.
one of the questions is like, we'll start with like the earliest one of how did you get started into drawing and comics and what did you draw at an early age?
I don't ever remember a time where I wasn't drawing. There was never an event that made me pick up a pencil and start drawing. I always drew from preschool. My earliest preschool memories, I would be copying, like Flintstones or something, whatever
Yes.
was on, whatever the cartoon shows, were on TV. Um, in in grade school, we'd have creative writing classes, and I would write a story, then I would draw the picture to go with the story, whatever it was, and they were always imaginative. Um, uh, Traveling to Mars or something crazy like that. It was never Oh, I rode my bike to the store today kind of stories. I was always making stuff up and being creative in that way. But I used to joke that I was born spinning a basketball on a pencil because those were my two loves growing up were basketball and art. And I don't remember ever, like I said, being that one moment where you said, "Man, I could be an artist. That's really cool. I want to do that." I just have always done it and always uh, told stories. And my at a very young age, I wanted to be an animator, because I saw, for me, when I was young, Flintstones, Popeye, Scooby-Doo, all this kind of stuff. And that's what I wanted to do. And then it's probably, I think I was 10. I got to go back here. Pro 70. Well, the first comic book that I bought on my own was 1973. So I would have been 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
And shocker, it was Frankenstein uh, from Marvel, where they had their Frankenstein series. And when I discovered comics, it was like animation went out the window. It was like, I don't care about that anymore. Because it was so incredible that you could draw you could anything, you know, and
Yeah.
you could tell the story. And it was just, for me, it was the perfect medium. And
Hmm.
so I started at that age. I just started working towards, you know, um, drawing comics. And that was kind of my goal from when I was third grade or whenever, fourth grade, whenever I was, I guess, probably fourth grade maybe. And so then I sort of got dialed in to comic collecting, discovered old bookstores that because they didn't have comic shops back then, but they would have old bookstores, used bookstores, and they would carry old comics. And I would go there as often as we talked my parents to taking me. And then as we got a little bit older, kids in the neighborhood, we get on a bus and go downtown and to these different places and get the old comics. And I started by going into these places, I started discovering like fanzines and like there was a newspaper that came out weekly called the Comic Book Buyer's Guide. And so I got a subscription to that. And so that would show up at my door every week. And it was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. So I'd read and you'd get all the news, comic book news. And so I would become aware of books that were coming out, like How
Yeah.
to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by Stan Lee and John Buscema. I mean, I was at the bookstore the day that book came out, so I could buy it, and other things like the origins of Marvel Comics and these different things, that anything I could get that would help me sort of understand the process and how to do it. And so then it was just, you know, I was just obsessed until I was 16 and got a car, and then my then my
Priorities
attention
changed.
my attention went more to dating and keeping my car running and things like that. But I was still reading comics, and but uh, it was literally from probably when I was 10 years old to when I was 16. It was nothing but comic books.
Yeah.
So
And do you remember like what genres you were writing in when you were younger, or like what type of stories you were doing?
it was always sort of either sci-fi or monster stories, because I hadn't really been exposed to comic books that much. So I'd seen Mad Magazine and things like that, and Cartoons Magazine, which was a magazine with for car aficionados, but it was full of cartoons,
Yeah, I
and that was
think.
sort of the joke, right? And
Mhm.
so I would see these things, like we go to the grocery store or something, and in the magazine rack, I'd see those type of things. So um, that was I that sort of fueled my imagination. So I have a booklet somewhere. I couldn't find it, just off the cuff, but that I did, I think, in first and second grade, where I
Yeah.
did all these little drag racers, and with these little characters, these weird little characters that drove different cars, kind of like the wacky races, but
Mhm.
they were all drag racers. And I still have notebooks with my creative writing stories I did in grade school.
Nice.
And, there was, I remember when I first saw The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I think was in third grade, I did a sequel, I wrote a sequel story to The Creature from the Black Lagoon and drew the pictures, and there was one where these astronauts went to Mars or Mercury, right? And there was these little creatures called the Mercury Hot Toes, and they had one leg with a big toe on it, and they would jump around. And so it was always like little creatures, or there's something underneath the kid's bed, those type of things that were always. I never, like I said, I never like would. Maybe once in a while I'd write a detective story, that type of thing, but it was always either a monster story or a sci-fi story or something that, fantasy type stuff. Because I was starting to go into bookstores and I would see the Frazetta paperbacks and the Doc Savage paperbacks and all these things with these fantasy elements in them, and that sort of really sort of shaped my early tastes. And so I did a lot of that
Yeah,
stuff as well.
I was in the same boat.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. You're a fantasy person. You like
yeah.
the like Lord of the Rings and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. And I was watching even as a teenager, Ralph Bakshi had like Wizards came out, and God, that was 77, I think. And which is sort of a dystopian future Lord of the Rings kind of, wizards and elves and so I was always, always thought that stuff was really cool. There was a great um what was the Ebenezer Scrooge? What's the
Oh, A Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol? There was a great Christmas Carol cartoon. There was a 30-minute cartoon that came out it was a TV special, but Chuck Jones produced it, and it's really, really cool. You can find it on YouTube. If you look up like the Chuck Jones Christmas Carol, it'll come up. And I remember seeing that, and you had the with the ghosts and the and just loved it. And
Yeah.
my mom would just still to this day cannot figure out why I was such a monster kid growing up, because I liked when I was very,
Yeah.
very little, I used to watch they used to have a thing called was it the Saturday matinee or something? And so you'd watch cartoons all Saturday morning, and then at like noon they'd have like a matinee movie, and it was a lot of times would be like an old Universal monster film or something.
Yeah.
And I had to watch it, right? And so my mom and I would sit there and watch Frankenstein or Wolfman or whatever on Saturday afternoon, and she could never figure it. Doesn't this scare you? And I'm like, no. And I've never had bad dreams or nightmares from a movie I've seen, with the exception of one episode of Thriller. That was a Boris Karloff hosted television show from the 60s. That was an anthology series. And there was one with an old witch, this wig that turned this, it was really creepy. And it was so funny. I after watching it that one time, and I had nightmares about it the whole thing, and I've never watched the episode again until like 2 years ago. I was telling my daughter about this, who's now, she's 23, so she was probably 20 or something at the time. And she goes, I think you need to face your fear and watch this episode. And I was like, I was like, I don't know if I can. And so she said, I'll watch it with you. So we found it on YouTube and watched the episode, and it was the most ridiculous thing. We were laughing through the whole thing, and it totally cured me of this fear that had been inside me for like, my entire life from seeing this episode.
Wow.
So, but other than that one thing when I was a kid, seeing that, that was the only one that ever really disturbed me. So,
See, the one that got me was it was the black and white Night of the Living Dead where they're eating the guy in the truck. I saw that
yes.
as a kid, and that one
Oh,
scared
well,
me.
I don't
That
think
and
like, how old were you when you saw it?
uh think it was before elementary, so yeah,
Oh,
it's pretty
geez. Yeah, that's,
yeah.
we went and saw those when I was in junior high. So I think it was well after they'd come out. I mean, I was in junior high in the mid to late 70s, but we used to, I had an art class in my junior high, and the teacher would always let us turn on the radio, and we listened to KGON, which was the classic rock station.
Hmm.
Well, it was the rock station then. Now it's the classic rock station.
Yeah.
And so we'd always listen to that, but they would come with these ads and
Mhm.
they'd say, special midnight showing, banned in 36 countries, Night of the Living Dead. And we're like, ooh, banned in 36 countries. We got to go see this. And so we'd go to these midnight movies, how I don't know whose parents were dumb enough to drop us off at, to watch a midnight movie and pick us up at 2 a.m. It wasn't my parents. I don't know who we
Yeah.
talked into doing it, but we would go and watch, and then Dawn of the Dead came out. We were like, oh, we got to go see that. Now that stuff grosses me out. But when I was 14, I was like, nothing would, shock me.
Yeah. So, you want to show the picture you grabbed?
Oh, okay. So when I was 12, I don't know. There we go. Can you
See.
see that okay?
Uh, oh yeah, I can see it, but I'm not sure how to make you big on this. Maybe if I make you the host. Let's see. Which it is showing up as your wife's name, by the way.
Well, she started the account. That's why the tech stuff is, I always go, shall I fix this? How do you do this?
Okay.
So me and a
Um,
neighbor kid, his name
let's
was
see.
Dan Erickson, and we formed our own comic company when I was 12 called Deal Comics. So Dan Erickson, Aaron Lopresti. The thing with Dan was though he never did anything. I wrote all the stories and drew them. But this was, I think, this guy right here. This was part of a team book. I can't for the life of me remember what it was called, but it was. I know I'd seen like Guardians of the Galaxy, not the movie, but the comic, and there was this
Yeah.
big sort of chunky square jawed guy in there, and so I probably ripped him off, and I
Mhm.
can't even remember, but I would usually do like we'd do a cover, and then we do. I keep want to go this way. Here we go.
Yeah.
We do a cover,
Oh yeah.
and I would end up getting maybe 2 or 3 pages into it, and then I would get bored, and then I would start a new one.
Mm,
So I had this, and I had what was it? I think there was a guy called the Challenger, and then I did a Morty the Meatball comic book. Morty the Meatball was a cartoon character that was advertised a spaghetti advertisement when I was a kid, and I had just read Howard the Duck,
mm,
and so I wanted to do my own version of Howard the Duck. So I did a Morty the Meatball comic. I did I had then I got, discovered Barry Smith's Conan and John Severin's work on Kull. And so I started
nice.
doing a barbarian comic called Valon the Destructor, I think it was.
Hmm.
Um, so basically whatever comic I discovered, then I would rip it off.
Yeah.
I discovered Swamp Thing. I started doing a thing called the Swamp Ghoul.
Yeah.
But so this was all like that's 12-year-old Aaron right there. So get an
Nice.
idea. If yeah, I've come a long way, baby.
Yeah.
Now this was interesting because this isn't a comic book,
Oh,
but there was a
wait, wait.
movie called Silent Movie that Mel Brooks
Oh, that's
did,
fun.
and I believe that was 1976, I think. So I was 12 years old, and I would copy this. The newspaper movie poster, and I went and saw this and thought it was hilarious. And so then I started like if I found stuff that I thought was interesting in the newspaper or magazine, I would just copy it.
Nice.
Not trace it, but copy it.
Hmm.
And so that's another piece that I did about when I was 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah, and then we got a kind of a then and now.
Yeah.
Oh, trying to say that our meeting's going to end in 10 minutes. Let's see. I know you mentioned like making a board game of Wraith of God.
mhm.
Is that, and I remembered in one of your videos you talked about your brother being really into board games. So was that kind of had to do with each other, or was it more the fans that wanted the board game?
That was more me.
Okay.
When we were kids, um, now again, we didn't have, there was no video games or anything like that. And so we had, and we still have like just an enormous collection of Milton Bradley board games, the old kind. And I don't play a ton of games now, but I did when I was a kid. And my son's into it a little bit. My brother's really into these more complicated, like he just got like Marvel Zombies game or something. They have all these really great little, uh, you know, plastic figurines that you move around like Zombie
Yeah.
Hulk, and it was really cool. But he's really into these games, he and his wife, and they play a lot of these games. And what I wanted to do, because I'm a fan of the old school stuff. Like I said, those long, thin box Milton Bradley box games where the boards would open up, and so that's kind of what I wanted to do. Just kind of everything I do seems to be retro. It's like I'm desperately doing whatever I can to make myself feel young again. And so I've got a really good friend of mine who, whenever I have writing problems, I'll go to him and discuss story problems, and we'll, banter back and forth until he figures stuff out. And so I sat down with him and said, I'm thinking about doing a board game. Um, and so we sat down and, over a couple evenings put together, which I think is a pretty solid board game. Now, it's not super complicated like these ones you get now that are in the square
Yeah.
boxes, and it's like, 2 weeks just to read the instructions, and then it takes
Yeah.
you, this is more of it's not simple, but it's more of a classic sort of Milton Bradley board game that you might have played when you were younger. And but I am going to have it. I have my brother and his wife test it out so they can tell me, you know, where it is working, or where it's not working. Because you write this stuff out, and there's always these little things that'll. Well, what if you land here and you don't have any of these? And then what do you do? And you think you got it figured out until you try to play it, and then you realize there's these gaping holes that need to be filled.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
uh, hey, there you go. You've been
Yeah,
upgraded.
I had to upgrade. That's why I tried
So
to do in
I
the
mean,
three.
what spawned this sort of idea to do this board game was just my memories as a kid of
Yeah.
just that's all we did was play board games, because or go outside and play. But we didn't have we only had 3 channels of TV, so there wasn't all that much to really watch, and most of the time, and there was no video games or anything. So we read comic books and played board games. And so that's kind of that sort of nostalgia is what is sort of uh, pushed me down that road.
Nice. Now, I know faith plays a large part in your stories.
Hmm.
You're writing moral tales to. So I have a few questions related to that because
Hmm.
I'm curious.
Hmm.
What denomination are you?
Well, I mean, I would say I was a non-denominational Christian, because the churches I've gone to are, I mean, I went to Foursquare churches for years,
Mm,
and I, the problem that happens is a lot of times in any sort of organized church in that
yeah.
regard is that you a pastor comes in, you like him, you like the way that things are running, but then he either retires or in this case passed away, unfortunately, and then you got someone else comes in, and then things change. And so through a period of time, decided to go elsewhere. And so we attend another church here in the area called Athey Creek Christian Church, but it's not a Foursquare is a denomination. This is not. So on the very rawest of terms, you would say that I was a Protestant Christian. I'm not Catholic. But
Yeah.
it's a non-denominational, just sort of Bible believing Christian church, and that's sort of what I've been raised on. We went
Yep.
to Baptist church for a while and some other ones, but it seems like you oftentimes can get in a church where they start making rules and regulations that aren't necessarily biblical, and then you're kind of
Hmm.
like, what are we really doing here? We're kind of getting off track. So
Yeah.
I've always wanted to stay non-denominational, so that they didn't, because every church denomination has certain
Yeah.
aspects that they have to stay consistent with, and if you don't agree with one of them or two of them, then you got issues. So I don't know if that I guess that answers your question. So
Yeah.
I would consider myself a non-denominational Christian.
And then one of my other questions is like, which translation do you prefer?
That's a good question because NIV is, I read that for the longest time, and then I realized that it was a sort of a paraphrase type
Hmm.
translation, which is easy to read, but you're not getting, you're getting more ideas than you're getting exact words. And
Hmm.
so the
And they messed with some of the
ESV, yeah,
gender stuff.
ESV is good. I read mostly the New King James version, which is also a pretty good, uh, accurate word for word translation.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's the last several years I've been in the New King James.
Yeah,
So
that was the one that I grew up with, was the new
mhm.
King James version.
Yeah, it's hard to read,
Yeah.
and it's a good translation.
Hmm.
There's a few mistakes and that
Hmm.
are major, but there's a few strange interpretations of a couple of words and stuff. And the New King James sort of solved that, and it's a more contemporary language, obviously. So it's there's not a lot of these and thous in there. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been using. My wife just got a ESV though, so we'll see if she moves me over to the ESV or not, or if I stick with the King James.
Yeah. And then how has that shaped your life, and is it much the same as with drawing and basketball that's just been part of your life forever, or
Yeah, my dad wasn't saved till much later in life. So my mom was, and so she was the Christian influence in the house and made sure we were always in church and always reading our Bibles and and made sure that Christianity was real in our lives and not, just go to church on Sunday, then live your life however you want to.
Mhm.
I've always kind of struggled though because I have this weird sort of attraction to monsters,
Yeah.
which doesn't make any sense. And I'm sure, you know, a Christian would come into my studio and go, "Dude, what is wrong with you?" And I would go,
Hmm.
"I know, but I don't even." It's just bizarre. I don't even think twice about it most of the time. But
Hmm.
I do find that when I'm writing my own stories and telling my own stories, that there's always a Christian element that works its
Hmm.
way into it, because it's important to me because I don't think you can't you can't have good versus evil if you don't have some sort of moral foundation
Yeah.
to define what is good and what is evil.
Hmm.
Um, and that's what I tried to bring into, Wraith of God is, you've got the Wraith is sort of a Christian character, but you're not really sure, right?
Hmm.
I kind of look at him as sort of being a what I'd call a Western civilization Christianity. That's someone that says they're a Christian, but doesn't necessarily really read the Bible or really
Yeah.
follow Jesus or any of that stuff. But they're just sort of, "Oh, yeah, I believe in Jesus and I believe in God," but they kind of, and Esther is a real Christian,
Hmm.
right? A real committed Christian. So that sort of dynamic I find really sort of interesting, but it also, it's me making my commentaries about stuff that I've seen in my own life or see around me, and but I've always wanted, even when the little writing I did for DC and Marvel, and then Malibu going back. There's always a moral to my stories. There
Hmm.
has to be a payoff, a moral payoff, and that's why I never really wanted to write monthly books because I'd rather approach a project like a screenplay and an enclosed story, a finite story, so that I
Hmm.
can figure out what my moral is to the story, what the characters are supposed to learn, and then I can write this entire story, and then it pays off at the end, both dramatically but also morally, right? So you
Yeah.
walk away saying, okay, you're a little bit more satisfied as a reader because there's more there than just, oh, they
Yeah.
killed the vampires. Now they're going to go get the swamp monster. And when you're writing a monthly book, you don't really have time to think as deeply about your stories.
Hmm.
They become more kind of just straight up adventure stories. You kind of put them together so that they work and they have the elements they need so that, you're beginning, middle, and end kind of thing. And hopefully you have a decent
Yeah.
payoff at the end. But it's harder to work in this sort of
Depth.
morality tale if you're just cranking out scripts.
Yeah.
And so I've never wanted to do, I always wanted to do like a mini series or
Hmm.
something that I could treat as a movie script.
Yeah.
And it started and it ended, and it's all, it's all put together for you. And that doesn't mean it doesn't leave the door open for another adventure,
Mhm.
but that particular, the two Wraith of God books so far, the first one with the werewolves, that story comes to completion.
Mhm.
But the characters of the Wraith and Esther continue on, right? So
Yeah.
that dynamic is like, okay, what's going to happen with them next? And then you work that into another monster story, but then there's their growth along the way. And what's the moral in the vampire story? Of course, there was, Esther coming to grips with her faith and her fears. And, in the first one, it was, we sort of uh Esther again was sort of questioning what she was doing, which I do all the time. Am I doing the
Mhm.
right thing? Right? We always ask that
Yeah.
question. Am I doing what God wants me to do? Or am I not? Am I doing what I want to do? And
Mhm. Am I
so
on the
that
right
was,
path?
yeah, exactly. And so that was what Esther was struggling with. And I've actually had some people going, I hope you focus on the Wraith more instead of Esther all the time. But Esther is sort of like, she's sort of like us. We're in Esther's situation, looking at the Wraith and trying to figure out what's going on. But we're going to get more in this third issue. We're going to get more backstory on the Wraith and more into their relationship. And uh, but I find uh, the problem with getting too deep into the Wraith too early
Mhm.
is you have to give away too much too
Yeah.
early about him. And
Mhm.
so that's why the first two issues have been sort of more focused on Esther's journey, moral journey. Although in the first one with the werewolf, the Wraith kind of admitted there at the end when he was kind of helpless and bleeding and he needed Esther's help to save him, that he wasn't exactly what he was pretending to be, and
Mhm.
that, maybe there was some doubts and those type of things. So um, but that's kind of how I look at, storytelling, and I think that who you are is always going to work itself into your stories, or what you
Yeah.
believe or what you think is
Mhm.
important. Those type of things are going
The
to work
themes.
in. Yeah, because they Christian morality is shaped my life, and so therefore it's obviously very important to me.
Mhm.
And so I think it's something that needs to be in a foundational, in a
Yeah.
good versus evil story. It's got to be.
Mm,
It's got to be in
I
there. So
concur. Um, Now, which are any of your characters from like your youth? Have they carried over, or are they more recent? Or
I've got most of the stuff I'm using right now in Empire Comics is all stuff that I created in the 90s.
mm,
Um, I have a couple ones that I created that I was younger, that I might be able to do something with under the right circumstances, but a lot of times you have to change the name and stuff because you're going, what you
yeah.
thought was really cool when you were 10 is, you look now and you go, oh, that probably isn't as cool as I thought it was. Um, but in the 90s, when I had broken into comics sort of lightly. I got in at Marvel doing a few things here and there, and then Malibu came about, and I went over to Malibu and did a book called Sludge, which was a monster
Mhm.
book,
Yeah.
and that sort of got my career going. But then I had in the 90s, once Malibu went under, I sort of had to reintegrate back, trying to get work into DC and Marvel, which was difficult. And so you'd get a job here and there, but it wasn't like someone was throwing X-Men at me.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time developing characters and thinking, well, you know what? I'll self-publish these, because Image had just come out and
Mhm.
they were doing, gangbusters, and you're thinking, well, why can't I do that? And so I started developing a ton of characters. In fact, the Wraith was a Western Ghost Rider pitch for Marvel, and they didn't, they weren't interested in doing anything with Western Ghost Rider. So, but I really liked it. So I just changed some elements in it and made it my own. But even the Nightclub, which was one of the backup stories, which originally was called Creeps, and
Yeah.
but I had to change that because someone came out with a book called Creeps,
Mhm.
Dan Mishkin, I think it was, uh, about the time, when I was still formulating all this stuff. These guys, creator owned books, where everybody had their own creator owned imprint, because of Image. And so that came out through, I don't know if it was Marvel or DC's imprint, but so I couldn't use that. So I had to change the name, and then I have, you know,
Powered Cube.
Power Cube, thank you very much, was originally Atomic Toy Box.
Yeah.
And then so I changed that and I did that through Dark Horse when I was
Yeah.
working at DC. And just because Mike Richardson, the publisher, had come up to me in the show and he said, "You want to do something?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I have something I need to do." And because I had done the one issue through Image, and then that was it. And so I thought I really need to finish this because I had people coming up to me at shows going, "Are you ever going to finish Atomic Toy Box?" I'm like, eh. So anyway, I did it finally through Dark Horse, but um, I have something called Primal Zone, which is a dinosaur
Yeah.
adventure
Hmm.
uh, interdimensional thing. And the only characters that I created recently for the Empire line is Impyrus and
Which he's a cool design, by the way. I like
thank
his
you.
design.
Well, we're going to get a backup story for him in this coming up Wraith of God that David Williams is drawing. That's going to be really, really
Nice.
cool. I've got like the first 3 pages from him and they're all colored and everything. That is really cool. But and Eon Chance.
Mm.
Um, and Garbage Man was somebody I created for DC Comics originally, and then got returned to me ownership wise. So it's more of a recent creation as well. But everything else is I came up with in the 90s.
To show the viewers.
Yeah, there's
And
Eon Chance right there with this black star head and
yeah.
the red balloon sleeves from the 70s, which I just can't
Which is
seem to
also
escape.
nice design.
But yeah, so and then I've got another fantasy sort of epic that I almost did through Vertigo,
Mm.
but didn't happen. It was like Kit Carter almost ended up in Mad Magazine. Wraith of God almost ended up at DC. Almost on all these. Um, and so that's called the tentative title is Warriors of the Light. And it's a Lord of the Rings type uh, adventure story. And I'm really thinking of after Wraith of God 3 doing that
That would be
graphic
fun.
novel before I go back to Wraith of God because I got a lot of stuff that I want to do, and it's
Hmm.
like, but it's not stuff I necessarily want to give away to anybody. So it's like
Hmm.
I want to draw all of it myself, and it's like, well, if you're gonna do
Mm.
that, it's gonna take some time. So
Yeah.
if I stagger some of these things, I'll be able to squeeze some of that stuff in.
The problem of having too many ideas and not enough time.
That's right. That's right. Well, and the thing is, like I said, I came up with most of these ideas in the 90s, so I had plenty of time. It's just I was always I was always thinking, if I do this at Marvel, if I do this at DC, then I'll have a big enough name that I can do my own thing and
Hmm.
people will buy it. And I never got to that point. And you get to a point where you finish a job and then here comes the next one and you're just like, I got bills to pay, I got kids to get through college and all this kind of stuff. And so your own stuff just kind of gets pushed over to the side and you just keep doing the Marvel and DC and whoever else work because it becomes like commercial art, like a commercial art
Yeah.
job. And you got, like I said, you got bills to pay and you don't want to take that risk of trying to self-publish. And especially before crowdfunding, it was really, really tough to get people to stray from Spider-Man and Batman. And buy something new, even if
Hmm.
they knew who you were, even if it was really cool, they just were like, I gotta spend my money on Spider-Man. And now, because Marvel and DC have really just pushed
Mm.
themselves off cliffs, um, it's opened the door for people that are really dissatisfied, and they seem to be more willing to look at independent stuff because so many pros, not just the normal independent market, but you're having pros that have done work for 10, 20, 30 years have been pushed into the independent market as well. So now you're not only getting, you're sort of like the Tick and Teenage
Yeah.
Mutant Ninja Turtle type stuff, but you're getting stuff that, wow, that looks like that could be a Marvel book, or that looks like it could be a DC book, but it's
Hmm.
being done by, independents who either been squeezed out of mainstream or have chosen to not work in mainstream anymore.
Yeah.
So there's opportunities now that just, weren't there. And so
Yeah.
that's my excuse anyway for why I never
For,
really did my own creator-owned stuff until now.
yeah.
Sounds like a good excuse.
It's better than you just procrastinated, right?
That's right. I mean, which also might be true.
Artists, we're both very we're always working, but we also always procrastinate too, right?
Yeah, that's right. You find ways to, oh, should I draw this page or should I go down and wash the dishes? I should go wash. I mean, you end up doing stuff that you would normally hate doing just to keep from doing what you should be doing, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, there was a few times I was working on a page, got frustrated, like I'm gonna go do the dishes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's in the refrigerator? What's on TV?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Whenever you have
Mm-hmm.
to do something, it
Mm-hmm.
suddenly becomes very undesirable to do. When you don't have to do it, that's all you can think about. Oh man, I really want to, it was like the Kit Carter painting. I just couldn't wait to get going on that Kit Carter painting for the movie poster. And then when I was doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get this done? It's such a grind. But and it's the same thing with pages. I'm really excited to start drawing Wraith of God 3. I've got all the covers
Mm-hmm.
penciled, inked, and colored. And
Which are
so
really
I'm
cool.
now going to start working on the pages. And I'm excited, but I guarantee as soon as I sit down and start putting pencil to paper, I'll be like,
I need a snack.
exactly. I gotta go wash the dishes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, process wise, are you no music, focus on what you're doing, or do you put music on in the background or
I go through stages
mm,
because um there was a period of time where I would just listen to music. I would put on either the radio or now like I'll turn on YouTube and just find like my rock list, right? And I'll just
hmm
start playing it. And or and then I get sick of it, right? It just
yeah.
becomes annoying. And so I say, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. Well, I listen to Christian radio a lot, so then you do that after a while, and then it becomes sort of tedious. You're like, okay, I don't want to listen to sermons all day. And
hmm
so then you start finding YouTube clips about people talking about art or whatever.
hmm
Or, I'm a big um,
Graybeards for me.
yeah, there you go. Exactly, right. Something like that that can kind of while you're working, you can listen to and now that I'm college football season is starting, I'm a big sports guy, and so I will listen to, people talk about college football, and I'll just, oh, this is a 30-minute video. I'll turn that on and go over here and draw while it's
Yeah.
going, and so it changes. I mean, I do like listening to stuff while I'm working, while I'm drawing or
Mhm.
painting. When I was working on the Kit Carter painting, all I did was watch painting tutorials.
Mm.
Just I didn't care who was doing it. I just turned them on and listened to it while I was painting, and it was really it was very interesting and I don't know. It was like you're in a studio environment, even though I mean, when I say studio environment, I mean more people than just yourself in the
Yeah.
studio, right? And
hmm
um, so it's kind of nice that when you're working on something like that to have company around, even though you're by yourself. Yeah, but it varies. Yeah, I would listen to Pawn Star episodes relentlessly
hmm
for this long period of time. I just turn them on in the evening, and if I had a sketch to do or layouts or a painting or whatever, and I would listen to Pawn Stars. And then I got kind of fatigued with that, and so it just changes.
hmm
I can't listen to anything when I'm writing. I can't listen to
Oh yeah.
music. I can't listen to anything. It's got to be
hmm
absolutely quiet because I can't have anything sort of invading my thought process while I'm trying to, think about.
And do you do full scripts or do you do the plot
I
style
I
scripts?
do I do full scripts, but only out of habit
Mm.
because a lot of times I go in and when I'm drawing a page, I'll change it.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to go back in and change the dialogue to fit what I've drawn. But if I get an idea that I hadn't thought of, because that's the thing when you're sitting there writing,
hmm
and you're going to be an artist as well, right? So you write the script and you think, okay, this works. And you don't necessarily think about it visually, or you do think about it visually, but not like breaking down every single panel
Yeah.
necessarily, right? You figure, okay, I'm going to put 5 panels on this page, but you're not sure exactly. And then you get to that page and you start really looking at it and thinking about it. And then you go, oh, okay, that, I need this and that, and you change this or whatever. So I'm glad that, I mean, that's one of the advantages of not working for DC or Marvel, that you can make those changes.
Yeah.
And, when I get a script, and I worked with a lot of good writers, but I'd get a script and I wouldn't even, I just kind of turned my brain off in terms of common sense, and I would just draw what they wrote. And made sure that the storytelling was there and it made sense visually, but I was not questioning, why is Batman doing that? Or why is this person over here when they should be over there? I go, that's not my problem. But when you're the writer and you're drawing and you have the ability to go back and change it, you do. When I did for example, the Metamorpho miniseries for DC, I had to write the script and turn it in. And so when I got that, the dialogue was already, written, and I couldn't just keep changing stuff, right? So I had to sort of go, unless it was something really egregious, I would just draw what I wrote. And so I had to be more careful when I was writing. What I'm doing now is sort of, I write sections of the script and then I'll start drawing it, and then I'll go back and write some more sections, which is a dangerous thing to do. But I always know, huh?
I find it helps because if you get stuck with the writing, you can draw it out and try to visualize it, and then go back to the writing. But I get what you're saying.
But you got to know where you're going, and that's the thing. Is I don't start working on something. I figure out what my punchline is, how I'm going to start the thing and where my punchline is. And then you can sort of fill in the gaps in between to sort of get where you want to go. And what I'll find a lot of times is I'll write out a scene, and I've done this on every project so far, where I've had a scene and I started drawing and I was like, this scene needs to be 2 pages, not 3. This is boring. And so then you cut it, and then you'll add another page to the fight scene later down the road to kind of make the pages work out. So I do a lot of that, because it seems like when you're writing and you have a couple characters standing around talking, that, well, they're saying important things, and then you start drawing it and going, oh, God, what was I thinking? I need to edit this down, and so there's always sort of that, but I always know where I'm going, so that I know, and I have the liberty of adding pages if I want to, right? There's no one that's telling me that I can't, if I say this is going to be 64 pages, it was like Kit Carter was supposed to be 64 pages, end up being 66, because I got near the end and I was like, this scene isn't long enough. This is a big, important scene, and it's just not long enough. And so I added a couple pages to make a scene longer, so that the rhythm felt better. And so now it's a 66-page graphic novel, not a 64-page. And so that's, and I always end up doing that. So I always put in my campaigns that's going to be at least 64 pages, because it might end up being 72 by the time I'm done. I don't know.
Yeah. How often do you change your layouts? Like if you make a layout and you realize that the pacing or the flow doesn't work right? Do you do that often, or?
Sometimes, not as drastically as I think as you're asking. What I'll do is, I will do a layout unless I'm inspired. And you just, like a page, you go, oh, there's going to be this here, and this is going to have the panel flow down like this, whichever happens every once in a while. But a lot of times you just get a page, right? And you're like, okay, I don't like to spend a lot of time on layouts, because I want to spend that time on the board. So what I'll do is I'll do these little 8.5 by 11 layouts, and it'll be more like just for clarity. Okay. I need a shot of Wraith here. Then I got a reaction shot of Esther. And then I need this. And I won't play with the angles too much. But then when I start drawing it, I'll say, well, I'm going to change the angle of this and make it more interesting. Because I just use the layouts a lot of times just as a storytelling map for clarity. So I make sure, okay, I need this many panels here, and this needs to be a close-up, this needs to be a shot of the Wraith, this needs to be a shot of Esther, this needs to be a shot of the monster, whatever. But then when I start drawing it, I'll start going, this would be really cool if it was low angle, or, if this would be more dynamic if I if I did it like this. So there's kind of that's kind of the two stages that I have.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you get it, like I said, you get inspiration. You go, oh, this will be a really cool page if I do it like this. And so you lay it out like that and you stick with it.
So in one of your interviews, I heard you mention that it was during when you were making the first Wraith of God. You mentioned doing 3 pages a week.
Yes.
Have you gotten more proficient, or are you still at that rate?
Less. It's the problem with crowdfunding is the promotional side of it,
Yeah.
right? And if I could just, get up Monday morning and work through, Saturday, take Sunday off or whatever. And sometimes I don't even, sometimes I don't take days off at all, and I could make sure that I could get 8 hours a day in, um, I would probably be able to do it. But
Mm.
what it's the extra stuff that gets in the way right now,
Yeah.
right? Because my wife, Shelly, her health isn't great right now. So I have to drive her to doctor's appointments.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's 93. So if she needs
Yeah.
to go anyplace, I got to take her. And so these things, and I'm not complaining, I'm just saying these things come up during the day that you don't really
Yeah.
plan on. And suddenly you've lost a couple hours, and then you got to get the engine going to,
Mm-hmm.
to start drawing again. And then, oh, now I got a live stream today for 2 hours. Oh, and then I got to make dinner, and
Mm-hmm.
I got to wash the dishes. And so, um, I, what I've done is I've kind of dialed back and said, okay, if I can get 2 pages penciled and inked a week, at least, then
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I'm planning my schedule at this point. And then, you try and do better than that, but,
Mm-hmm.
because I've been averaging anywhere from usually 10 to 12 pages a month of
Nice.
pencils and inks. And it was interesting because Kit Carter, I hired an inker, Matt Ryan, who I worked with for years at Marvel, DC, CrossGen. Um, and I thought, okay, because I didn't want to spend a ton of time on Kit Carter. I wanted to get it out more like a regular comic book assignment would
Yeah.
be, right? And get it done in like 6 months or whatever. So I could get back and, I wanted to get to a point where I was getting out 2 campaigns a month so I could get
Mm-hmm.
more of my stuff out sooner. Well, there's always something, right? And so what happened was, um, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but my colorist was a little slower than I had
Mm-hmm.
anticipated. And so the book was originally supposed to be at the printers in June. It didn't get to the printers till August, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd lost my slot.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm, well, yeah, we can turn it in, but it's still going to be 4 weeks before we can print it. And you're just like,
Yeah.
oh gosh.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I'm at right now. And so my goal was to launch Wraith of God 3 in June.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in September, and I haven't done it yet.
Uh, I've heard the colorist say that when he does a book, he likes to see it all done at once before he knows like where the colors are going to be and stuff like
mhm.
that. So it takes a little bit longer, but yeah.
Well, it depends.
There's speed.
There's colorists that'll do like a page at a time and whatever. And then there's colorists that will, like mine, and would do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. So he's got color on every page, but not any page is done, and you're like, dude, give me some pages so I can get these lettered. And
Yeah.
so that's been Matt, my inker, was super,
Mm-hmm.
quick and reliable. He was right behind me, no more than a week behind me at any given time. And but then I was penciling really tight again, like I normally
Yeah.
do. And so I wasn't gaining really that much time as I thought I might be, because you're just at this stage when you don't have anybody looking over your shoulder, you're not going to do 5 or 6 pages a week. You're just not
Mm-hmm.
going to. Like I had to do all the time at Marvel and DC, because you want the work to be a little bit better. You want to spend a little bit more time on it. And so you're just not going to crank stuff out like that. So But I think if I had someone at every stage, if I had an inker that I trusted, which I do with Matt, is really, really good. And if I could land on a colorist that was really sort of very commercial oriented, right? And was like, okay, I do 5 pages a week or 10 pages or how many ever,
Mhm.
and then you could probably get something out in a reasonable amount of time. But then you're still on the back end. You never
Yeah.
know what the printer's going to do. You never
Mhm.
know. And
Mhm.
can I get this in 2 weeks? Yes. Or can I get this in 2 weeks? No, it's going to be 2 months. And you're just like, it depends on what time you get done with the book. Right.
Yeah.
And since we're such small volume, it's like we get pushed to the back of the line, not to the front.
Mhm.
And so that's been my biggest uh, problem with every one of my projects is the printing turnaround time. Because I
Yeah.
use the biggest printer in the country because they get the best rates and they do the best work, in my opinion, but they're
Which
also the
printer is this?
busiest. Hmm?
Which printer is this?
Jostens. And the
Johnston's.
problem with Jostens is they print all the yearbooks for everybody in the United States.
Mm.
So there is like from, what was it, like April through July, forget about it. And so you have to fit into those windows, and then they
Yeah.
fit you into a window, and then you miss that window,
Mhm.
then you're back
Mm.
to
Yeah.
having to wait. And so this was a really interesting campaign, the Kit Carter one, because I had a movie poster,
Mhm.
I had a sketchbook. I should say have because they haven't been shipped out yet. But so movie poster, sketchbook. Um, seems like there's something else. Oh, I had
The
like a
shot
sticker,
glasses. Oh yeah.
shot glasses,
Just
trading
t-shirts.
cards, T-shirts. Everything for this campaign is done and has been done and sitting here for weeks while I'm
Mhm.
waiting for the books to come in.
Yeah.
And so normally it's kind of like, you go, oh my gosh, I got to get these trading cards to the printer because the book just went to the printer. I'm going to get it back in 2 weeks and I got to make sure I get all this other stuff. Well, that hasn't been the case. I mean, I've just got everything is just set up and ready to go, and it's been that way for weeks. And now we
So
just have to.
organization skills help out a lot.
Well, and having my mother, amazingly at 93, still bagging and boarding everything for me so I don't have to do that, saves me a ton of
Now,
time.
now I
So,
have another question for you. Well, actually, I have probably two more,
okay.
but this one's about your fundamentals because you have pretty solid uh knowledge of shadow and anatomy and of form and
Hmm.
perspective. So I was wondering, you didn't go to art school, so did you just develop those skills over time working, or was it from the community environment of the studio?
It was books mainly. I would find um, books on different things at a very young age, and because I was very interested in every aspect of how to do this. So, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way was a really sort of helpful. I mean, everybody says this, but it's true. It had a little bit of everything in it, but not a whole lot of anything. But it
Mm,
touched on everything. And so you said, okay, these are the fundamentals of perspective. Okay, well, I need to know more about perspective. So then you'd go find a book on perspective and learn how that works. And what you learn in being in a studio environment is like tricks. Like,
mm,
it's not necessarily fundamentals. It's, hey, I got to do a beach scene with 100 people. How do I do this? How do you cheat perspective, right? It's like, well, okay, well, you draw a line across the page and say, okay, that's everybody's eye line. So if I have a guy that's 6 foot, then if I put everybody's eye line on that line, and then you just, proportionate. If there's a guy way in the background, his eyes are still on that line, but he's obviously tiny, right? And then
mhm,
the guy in the foreground is much bigger, but his eyes are still right on that line. Now, basically, what that is telling you is that everybody's the same height,
mhm,
but it's a quick way to make sure everything's in perspective without doing this incredible grid that, you know, takes you
Yeah.
an hour or 2 hours to put the grids in. So little cheaty things like that you learn. And
Like the character informing the perspective.
yes. Yeah. And so all the fundamentals I learned were from books and what classes I would take, you know, here and there. Um, you know, my mom was she's a big art fan. She's a big fantasy, you know, sci-fi, you know, Star Trek person, and likes, you know, she doesn't like horror movies, but she likes King Kong, and she'll go and see, you know, things like that, Lord of the Rings, you know, she likes that stuff. And but she was also a big art fan growing up of like pinup art, because it was very, very popular back, you know, when she was little, you know, George Petty and you know, Hayden Sundblom and all these illustrators, golden age of illustration. Pinup art was very sort of classy and sort of part of American pop culture at that time. And so my mom was a big fan of that, Vargas, people like that. So when what most kids start doing, at least, you know, my experience, is that you're a guy, so you draw what you know. So you start drawing all these superheroes, and you're drawing guys all the time, but you don't really draw female characters, right? And then you get to an age where you start to notice girls, you know, 12, 13 years old, whatever, and you start saying, well, I need to work some girls into these stories. But so all your girls end up looking like men, right? And because that's all you've been drawing. And so my mom would sit there and go, no, her shoulders are too broad. She needs more hips. Her waist is too thick, you know, and she was constantly on my case about my female figure work. And I would buy books, um, you know, not just like superhero books, but actually drawing books on anatomy and figure work. And I would look at those and start figuring stuff out. And then, like I said, I always had my mom. I'd show my mom. She'd go, "Yeah, no, that's wrong. You know, you need to, you know, do this or do that." And so I have a reputation for being able to draw pretty girls, and it's all because my mom browbeat me at a very young age, and still does. I don't like that face. I don't like her face. That's not very pretty, you know. And so it was that I was self-taught in all those things, but self-taught basically means that I sought out the book and the instruction that I needed to learn on my own, and at least the fundamentals. And like I said, you take classes. I mean, I took a lot of art classes. I never, you know, majored in it, but whenever I was, you know, someplace, when I was in film school at USC, I took painting classes. When I was, you know, at Oregon State in a business major, I took art classes. I took sculpting. I took different things. And you have to be able to observe. You got to be someone that observes life, which can get you in trouble because you're constantly staring at people and they think you're a weirdo, and you're really breaking down their facial anatomy or their figure, or what do they look like when they're walking, and what kind of clothes are they wearing. And so I mean, I'm sure I've got so many people think that I'm just this big weirdo because I will have a conversation with somebody and then I'll start looking at the features on their face and how their face is just like, and they're like, why are you looking at me like this? It's kind of like, well, it's not what you think. And so, you know, through observation, you can really learn a lot. And then you look at other artists that you really like, right? And what are they doing? Why is that working? And why is it not working when I'm doing it? And so you break it down and, you know, figure out what they're doing and how you know, like wrinkles and clothing and stuff is always, you know, sort of challenging, right? So like, you don't want to do too many, but you know, you want to do enough, and you want to make sure it looks right. And so, you know, all those little things, and those are things you're constantly learning and changing and growing and picking up, but you have to observe, and you have to like I got 3 or 4 books on perspective sitting over there. I've got a ton of anatomy books. I don't really use them anymore, but I used them all the time, you know, when I was younger.
And I forgot, I did have a question about this book on like who did the layout, because I feel like the double page spreads
It sucks.
Yeah,
Um, all right.
does it a
Um,
disservice.
no, yeah, it was really, I was very upset with this whole project. What happened was Andy Smith had done a How to Draw Comics book through Watson Guptill Publishing. And all they do is how-to books.
Mhm.
And they wanted to branch out and do more than that. And
This one?
yeah. And so his rep for whatever, he was getting ready to do the second one or something, and his rep was in town. We were at CrossGen.
Mm.
And I said, introduce me. And so she came by and he introduced me to her. And I told her about this idea that I had, which is basically this field guide, humorous field guide for these weird creatures,
Oh.
and explained how it would all work. And she goes, normally all we do is how-to books, but she said, we're trying to branch out and do new things. And this sounds like this could be a really cool project. She said, let me go and pitch it to them and see what, and then I'll get back to you. So she comes back and said, yeah, they went for it. They love it. And I went, really? So, so I got the okay to do it. And then and then the reality came in where they said, okay, we're going to give you a $1,500 advance. Now you've looked at the book.
Mhm.
There's tons of paintings in there,
Yeah.
spot illustrations. There's a ton of artwork in that book. And I said, okay, $1,500 won't even, that's like a week worth of pay, right? So I'm like, okay. So I said, no, I got to have, so I talked him into $2,500, right? Yeah. So everything in there has a painting, and then
Mhm.
it has like little pencil drawings that go with it, field guide
Yeah.
illustrations. And then of course you have the writing, right? Which you still have to do. So I talked him into $2,500. And so this became a project that I was doing on the side, right? While I was working in comics, because you might as well not have given me anything, right? It was nothing compared to the amount of work involved in this. So they basically at some point threatened to cancel it because I was taking so long. And I said, no, I really want to do this book. Let me, so I cracked down, and over like a couple of months after like 2 years, I finally got everything done. And like I was taking my son to his swimming lessons, and I
Magma.
was up in the stands writing, the material for the book while he was swimming, practicing
Yeah.
his swimming every day. And so I turned the stuff into them, and I had already designed layouts. I said, this is kind of how I want the book to look, or what I kind of wanted to do. And they said, Aaron, we have professional designers, you have to let us handle this. And I'm like, so that's what happened. And so they would come back
Yeah.
and say, we need this, we need that. And I'd say, okay. So I'd add, like, the maps and stuff weren't originally in there. Those were kind of like last minute things to
Mhm.
throw in. And they had this page count, right? And they're saying we have to meet this page count.
Yeah.
And so that's why you'd see some of those drawings like on a double page spread,
And it
they're
does.
going the wrong way. And they
Mhm.
just, because they're like, well, this shouldn't be one page. We want to make it two because we have to fill in 144 pages
Yeah.
or whatever it was, and so they made a lot of dumb decisions like that. The guy that edited my script, he didn't edit it at all. There's so
Mhm.
many punctuation mistakes in that
Mhm.
book. It's unbelievable.
He
And I
just
was
took
like,
the money and ran.
yeah, I was just like, dude, I go, I am not an English major, okay? So my punctuation sucks. You guys need to go over this and make
Mhm.
sure it's. And I swear to you, they made no changes. It was exactly as
Yeah.
I turned it into them.
You're not
And
the only one that's happened to either. There was a few books I read in high school where like the story's good, but there would be errors all throughout the book. And it's like, what are the editors doing if they're
I know. It was just insane. And then they came back, and I hate the cover because they said, this is what we want to do for the cover. And I go, no, we're not doing that for the cover. I had other ideas for the cover. And they said, no. I said, this looks like a collection of Sunday comic strips.
hmm
I go, this doesn't look like it should look of what we're pushing here. And then they wanted to add a how-to section. And I was like, this is not a how-to book.
hmm
And they said, but because that's what they published, they couldn't get away from that, right? So they said, well, just put in
Yeah.
a section in the back. I said, all right, I'll do a how-to section in the back. But then they added it to the title, right? And it's like,
The sketch.
yeah, that was that the left-hand side is the Fantastical Creatures, the one that they wanted to do. I wanted to do a book cover that sort of made it look like an old journal, and this is,
Like this?
well, that was better than, I liked the one with all the, either one of those would have been better than the one that they made me use. Cause they're like,
Yeah.
we want them on an island. And I go, why would they be on an island? And we
Hmm.
want this sign there. And I'm like, why would they be on an island with this? I mean, it was just like the
Yeah.
dumbest thing. And they were
Hmm.
just, and I gave them other options and they kept picking this dumb idea. And so I ended
Yeah.
up I had to do it, what they wanted to do. And so talk about a good reason to self-publish.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh
I
my
did
God.
notice there's a few creatures from like your Kit Carter, like the Bayou Boogeyman and
Yeah,
the
it's like I got to use these things someplace,
yeah. At least you have more control there.
Yeah, well, what I did was I thought, okay, well, since he's the Bayou Boogeyman, but now I have him on Kit Carter, this planet, I'm like, okay, so there has to be a backstory where somehow some of those pods floated through space and ended up on Earth, and then he in the bayou, and then so that's where he came from. So I've got to,
Like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but not
right, exactly. And then you got the magma guy, the lava guy.
yeah, Schmagma.
And so I've got to make sure that that there's an explanation for why those
It's
things
his
ended up on
cousin.
Earth. Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm sure I could come up with something if I needed to, if push it ever came to shove. But that's my explanation for the Bayou Boogeyman. Lava
Mhm.
guy, I'm still working on, but I'll come up with something.
It could have been like an ember that came off him and
That's right.
floated.
Or maybe before the uh, maybe someone someone picked up a sample and it flew it eventually got to Earth. It sold through all these different alien trades and all this kind of stuff and ended up on Earth. And then it became, yeah. So, I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of ways you can get around it, but I created so many creatures for that book. I was like, when I was doing Kit Carter, I was like, why should I come up with new all these great creatures and the tree monster I really love and the lava monster are
Hmm.
two of my favorites. And I was like, I got to use these guys. I got to use them. So,
My favorite's the Christmas Gremlin.
oh, that I got to say, I really enjoyed doing the write-ups for these characters
Hmm.
because I would sit there and like I said, 90% of them I wrote during my son's swim practices. And I would sit up there with a notebook and I would just start writing the most nonsensical crap. And then it would just go from one thing to the next. And it just got so absurd. And that was exactly what I wanted.
Hmm.
So
The,
I
the
just
one
wish the
that grossed me
punctuation
out
was
was
better
the ice dragon, where the iced coffee
with the
goes
ice.
through.
You're sitting there, and what I did was most people write that stuff and then they illustrate it. I came up with almost all the creatures before I wrote any of that stuff. So I
Hmm.
had like, oh, the sloth toad, what's his story, or like you said, the Christmas gremlin, that probably was inspired because we always, every time you take out the Christmas ornaments, the lights are tangled up,
Hmm.
even though you didn't tangle them up the year before when you put them away. It's like, how does this keep happening? Things like that. And but I would just come up with just rando uh, creatures, and then I'd have to come up with what's the story behind this guy, and they all came during swim practice. So,
Yeah. Uh, that brings my next question. What's your favorite style or monsters to create or just see in a movie?
um, I'm an interesting character because I don't like horror films in the
Hmm.
sense of what you consider a traditional horror film.
Yeah.
Um, I like monster movies though,
Hmm.
because um, and I'm still working on this, trying to figure this out. But my rationale is, from an artistic standpoint, if I like the makeup, if I think the makeup looks good, then I'm interested in it. If I
Hmm.
don't, like, I'm not just a Frankenstein fan. I'm a Boris Karloff Frankenstein fan
Yeah.
because that's the best makeup, right?
Hmm.
And when the other Frankenstein movies, like Graham Nolan, for example, he's just a universal monster fan. Billy Toots
Yeah.
is a universal monster fan. I am a fan of certain characters if I like the makeup.
Yeah, same
Right.
here.
So I think it's more of an artistic thing than it is just a passion for monsters. Because there's really dumb looking monsters that don't do anything for me. And then there's really cool looking monsters. You're like, oh man, that's so cool. You know, so that's why I don't like all dinosaurs. You know, some people are dinosaurs, but like T-Rex is really cool. And there's dinosaurs that are cool, but there's ones that are kind of dumb looking. And you're like, I don't care about that guy.
Yeah, like mine is the Velociraptor. That's my favorite.
Well, those are very, very cool. And but I have my little, you know, I have my dinosaurs collection over there, but I don't buy the dumb looking ones.
Yeah.
They're cool looking ones. And so my whether I'm creating a monster or going to see a movie, it all comes down to I think it looks cool or not. And that's a weird motivation, but it's really, really true. Like that, did you see the vampire movie, the Nosferatu movie? Not Nosferatu, but it was uh the the last voyage of the Demeter.
I haven't seen that one, no.
Okay. The only reason I'm not a big vampire guy, okay? Because they're just dudes with fangs.
Yeah.
You know, and they seem to be way more evil than, you know, I kind of like monsters that are sort of, the werewolf doesn't necessarily want to be a werewolf. He just is, right? And then
victim of circumstance kind of deal.
Yeah, vampires seem like they're just way more evil. And but anyway, they
like lawyers.
Huh?
Like lawyers.
Yeah, there you go. But in the last voyage of the Demeter, which did horribly at the box office, it's a pretty good movie though. But they went with a Nosferatu design, so the vampire is more of a monster than he is just this evil vampire. I mean, he's this evil vampire, but he's a really cool looking monster, and so that's the only vampire that I have any interest in is the Nosferatu, because they actually look more like a monster and less like just an evil human being.
In Garbage Man.
Yeah, and this guy, and so whenever I come up with a creature, I'm coming up with it has to do with story, right? But if I'm doing a dragon, it's going to be a cool looking dragon. It's not going to be a dumb looking dragon, or I'm not going to be happy with it. And so I don't know that I've sat around and drawn just the first monster that comes to my head. I mean, I do that like with elves and trolls and stuff like that. I kind of enjoy doing that. But for monsters, it's usually there's a purpose behind it, right? And so, you know, like the Bayou Boogeyman, it was like, what would I do a swamp creature that's different than? I don't want them to just look like Swamp Thing, right? So what would be different? And so you start messing around with elements. Well, there'd be a lot of, you know, maybe windy tree branches. What if the guy's made up of and a lot of moss and things like that, right? And so then you design his face and you say, well, I'm a guy that I like sort of simple but iconic looking sort of faces. Like Predator is a really great design for a monster, whereas, you know, I can tell you a dozen movies that just have like really gross looking things that are monsters, but they're not something you can make a toy out of. You know what I mean? They're just gross looking, and I'm not into that. But if it has an iconic look and design to it, then it becomes cool. It becomes a character, and so that's what I'm always trying to do when I'm drawing creatures, and when I seek them out in movies and film.
Same here.
There you go.
Yeah.
You have good taste. You have good taste in monsters.
Yeah, like my taste, I usually lean toward kind of like the insectoid type monsters and plants and, you know, like
Really? Well, insects are a good foundation for monster design because they're so creepy looking anyway.
like I don't know if you ever saw Men in Black, the giant cockroach in that. Yeah, I like that design. That one's a fun design.
Well, I tend to gravitate towards reptiles, I guess, if you had to take a specific way to go. So I will be more likely to draw, anytime I come up with a monster, it sort of will have, at least initially, will have some sort of reptilian sort of characteristic to it. unless then I'll draw it and go, that looks like 10 other things I've drawn. But I won't necessarily say draw something that looks like a lion or a bear. That doesn't
Yeah.
really appeal to me as much as, snakes and lizards are much more creepy
Yeah.
and interesting looking. So that I tend to gravitate in that direction.
Lizards are cool.
Yeah.
Also sea creatures too.
Yeah,
Which
yeah, you can find a lot of interesting stuff in.
which have you ever seen the goblin shark?
I have. There's with
Yeah, those are
it's
wicked.
freaky
Yeah.
stuff. I designed the stonefish is really interesting, creepy
Mhm.
looking, that you can use for basis of stuff, which I've done that before. So, but like I said, very rarely do I do like mammal oriented.
Yeah.
Because mammals are generally pretty nice looking, and it's kind of
Mhm.
fun. And oh, this is my dog, but lizards are like, oh, yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could do kind of like a rat monster. Some people have aversions to rats,
I
but
suppose. I'm trying to think if I've drawn rats in comics, but I don't know if I've ever done a rat character. Didn't Spider-Man had a rat character? What was he? In that Craven's Last Hunt storyline, that rat character was actually pretty well designed. I think Mike Zeck designed it. Vermin or something like, yeah, it was Vermin was what he was called.
I'll
And it
have
was
to look
like, how
that
do you
up.
take a rat and make him like a hybrid between a man and a rat? And he did a pretty good job with it. It was pretty creepy looking. So
Yeah. And then I think that's pretty much it. Unless I know there's always movies, but any
Jaws.
Jaws. Oh
Jaws
yeah,
is very
that
good too.
reminds me of the question I was going to ask you.
Mm.
You say Jaws is the perfect film. So what elements make up the perfect film for you? Because you did go to film school too. Yeah.
Um, well, first of all, um, the it's got Hitchcockian tension to it. Okay, I think Spielberg's a big fan of Hitchcock, and he obviously, you've heard the stories. He wanted to show the shark, but they couldn't because it didn't work most of the time. So he had to come up with creative ways to create tension with this. Basically, it's a monster movie, is what it
Mm-hmm.
is, and this creature that we get to see very little of, which I think is great, because the more you see of anything, the more desensitized you come. Like you brought up Sleepy Hollow before, the Johnny Depp version, and it's like you
Yeah.
see the Headless Horseman so much, he almost feels more like the Terminator than he does this ghostly apparition that. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's sort of, you desensitize yourself to that, the horror of that character because you see him too much. And so with Jaws, you get that sort of element where you really don't see the shark very much. And the use of the barrels, it's creeping underneath this dark water, right? There's some monster down there. It's there, it's gigantic, but you can't control it. The surprising thing about Jaws is the characterization, the relationship between the characters, and how deeply each character is fleshed out. So you really care about these characters. They're not just like Jaws 2, you hate the characters because they're a bunch of whiny teenagers and you're just
Mm-hmm.
begging for them to get eaten.
Yeah.
But in this, you have these complex characters, all very different. And that was kind of the surprise, the reward of that film was like, this is a
Yeah.
really good character film.
Mm-hmm.
And despite the monster elements to it,
Yeah.
and I think we're all inherently scared of what we can't see.
Yeah.
And go swimming in the ocean when you can't see the bottom. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you go swimming in a lake and it freaks you out because, yeah, there's nothing in there except trout, but at the same time you're like, what if there were, what if because it's
Yeah.
can't see.
It's the
And
unknown.
yeah, exactly. And so there was that element to it, but I thought Spielberg's direction was extremely creative and clever. His use of shots and how he um, visually framed, just from a technical standpoint, how he visually framed shots, and the scene where they're on the Chief Brody and the mayor are on the ferry, right? That's all one shot, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
start in a medium shot, and then they walk closer to camera, then they walk into a close up. And each time they do that, one of the characters drops out of the conversation. So it's finally just Brody and the mayor in a close-up when he says, you know, you yell barracuda, people say, huh, what? You yell shark. We got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July. And so you really look at that, and maybe when you're watching it the first time, you don't notice it because it's so seamless. But then when you start breaking stuff down, when you've seen it 100 times, you start noticing stuff like that. And you just have such a great appreciation for how they staged that scene. And then
Yeah.
some of the stuff on the beach, some of the shots on the beach. I mean, everything is so well thought out and creative without being obnoxious, right? So it's like you're not necessarily noticing the shot until you break it down and start thinking about it. And then you understand the technical mastery that's involved in doing what he did. And so there's that aspect of it, the character aspect of it, you know, the acting is terrific. And then the suspense and horror of this turning a fish into a monster and a killing, it's really a miracle of evolution. It's a perfect killing machine. So all those elements, I think, and then plus you put into it the fact that my mom would not let me go see it when I was 12 when it came out.
Yeah.
And so I desperately wanted to see it for years before I finally got to see it. And that probably adds to my favoritism towards it. But I mean, even you just look at any critic's top 100 list and it's in there, and generally in the top 50 best films ever made. So it's just everything on it is, it's not a movie you look at and go, well, what could they have done better here? You know, if they added a scene here, would it have been better? Would they? No. It's just it just really really works on all levels. And
Did you hear about it being based on a true story of an incident that happened in, I think it was like the Mississippi River with a
it
bull
was
shark?
that was the well, they actually mentioned the uh the event in the movie. It was in New Jersey, and the coastline of New Jersey. 3 or 5 people were killed by a single shark over the course of or what they believe to be a single shark over the course of a week. Um, I know the story you're talking about in the Mississippi, but I think that was a bull shark. I might be
Yeah.
mistaken. Um, and but I mean, it's only based on the concept of a shark eating people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's about the only, you
Yeah.
know, similarity between the two things. But the idea of a shark, you know, staking out an area until the food source is gone is, I think, harkens back to that New Jersey beach coastline incident. But yeah, I mean, how often do you have something like that come out that just sort of affects everybody's? People are still terrified of sharks in the ocean because of that movie, which is
Yeah.
remarkable, you know.
And it is
That's me defending
remarkable how
James.
it has affected society. But
Yeah, so they must have done something right with it, you know. It's like
mhm.
Star Wars, you know, it's
Yeah.
still around. It's not great now, but it was, and
Yeah.
because, you know, you did something right at the right
Yeah.
time, and it stays with
But
us.
whenever you like retell a story over and over, it gets watered down eventually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
partly why I never got into Marvel comics and DC too much, because they had too much stories. I like a more concise story, and that's partly why I like the independent projects, is because you're making a concise story.
well, the problem with ongoing series, and you see this in television, I think is even a better
Yeah.
example, is that after a while, it's just like it's the cycle just keeps going around. Like Walking Dead, I think I watched it up to the point where the governor got killed, and then I was like, I'm done. You know, what are they just going to keep doing the same crap over with a different
Mhm.
villain? But you know what I mean? It's like, oh, here come the zombies. They're going to kill the zombies, and then you know
Yeah.
you've got and you just kind of get bored with the characters after a while. I can understand why when you're younger and you watch a television show or something, oh, why did this actor leave, or why did they change the format?
Hmm.
It's because people get bored with it.
Hmm.
And same thing with Spider-Man or Batman. People fall in love with the characters though, and continue to support them, even though the stories maybe aren't necessarily all that great, or you're not seeing anything you haven't seen 100 times before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to, like I said, I like to approach projects uh, sort of with a finite story, which is, I don't know how long I'm going to go with Wraith of God, because it's like, how long can I go before it just becomes a monster of the month kind of thing?
Yeah.
So once I get to the point where I've, you know, like, do the Wraith and Esther ever end up together? I mean, once they do, the story's pretty much over,
Yeah.
right? And
There's not
so,
much out.
right? And so, because that's, people want that, or that, not necessarily in Wraith of God, but in, you always have, like, a television show Castle, for example, where you had the two characters were, first of all, they didn't like each other, then they did like each other, then there was sort of this, this romantic tension, which everybody loves, the romantic tension. Are they going to kiss? Are they going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
But then once that's gone, it's kind of like, well, why am I watching this show anymore?
Yeah.
And so I think everything runs its course at some
Mm-hmm.
point. And so I just like to approach one project at a time and give you guys a complete story, and then we'll see. If
I
people still want more, then I'll give you more. I mean, I
I
have
like.
an ending point for Wraith of God.
Mhm.
How quickly I get there will depends on, how popular it stays. If people quit buying it or getting bored with it, then I'll wrap it up. If they don't, maybe I'll continue it for, another couple books or whatever. So
I am interested to see how Mr. Midnight and Wraith connect. Because
but see, once I do that, once I reveal
yeah,
that, it's over.
yeah,
Okay. The Wraith is over. So I can't, that's the last story. So when does that last story occur? Does it,
yeah.
we'll see how Wraith of God 3 does. If Wraith of God 3 does as well as the previous two, then I'll go, okay, people are still interested. Then I'll continue to develop this. But my original idea was probably 5 books.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that would work out well. Now, if people, you know, we'll see. We'll see how it goes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but I could, like, throw in, well, I could do a swamp monster story. I could do a Frankenstein story. I could do a mummy story.
Ghost story.
Right, exactly. There's all these different things you could hit on, but at some point, the relationship and their destiny of Wraith and Esther is going to play out.
Mm.
And then that's when and so then it's like, do I just keep sticking filler in the middle and dragging it on?
No,
No,
you lose
you
readers that
wrap it
way.
up, right? You wrap it up. So that's what I'm looking at, is 5. um
Unless you can connect the filler to the actual story and make it work.
well,
But
you
if
can
it's
do
just
that,
filler,
but you can't really, you don't really progress the characters in any meaningful fashion,
mm-hmm.
because at that point you're just extending
Yeah,
this dynamic, and it's not growing. It's just, oh, I'm just going to have them have another misunderstanding, or I'm just
yeah,
going to give Esther another reason to be pissed at the Wraith, so then they can go back 3 steps and then, start over again. And it's like, yeah. Um, but if I do 5 books, that's, and if I work something in between there, that's another 3 or 4 years before it's completed anyway,
mm-hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
um, so, it'll probably have run its course by then. I just hope that I've got something else to replace it with.
Yeah. Like your Warriors of Light,
That's
or
right. Well, I've got other projects I can put out for sure. So we'll
Old
see.
Glory is another one that you have.
Yeah, that was a concept that came up when I was working at Malibu, once again in the 90s, apparently my most fertile imagination period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're trying to look for work all the time, you're constantly coming up with ideas how you can create your own work. Once you settle in and are working all the time, you do less of that because you don't have to. Um, but it was kind of a sort of, I don't want to say a modern take on Captain America, but a little bit of a different take on Captain America, and which I wouldn't mind doing. I think it's an interesting story, and I was pitching it at Malibu, but Malibu fell apart before we could get that far, or I might have been able to do it. And then Space Hunters,
Hmm.
which is sort of a Guardians of the Galaxy meet Indiana Jones kind of thing. And so yeah, in the back
Yeah.
of the book, I tell about all these issues that are,
Yeah.
supposedly coming out and what's happening, right? And of course,
Hmm.
so I don't know which one I would, I don't necessarily have a favorite. I don't really enjoy drawing tech stuff, so but I've got a story for Space Hunters that's pretty good, and then I've got the story written for Warriors of the Light, so
Hmm.
I could do that. I've got the story for
And would that one
Primal
be
Zone.
just like a one shot, or do you have ideas for like stories after?
Well, my concepts are always, I never like kill anybody at the end, right? It's kind of like
Hmm.
you fulfill the adventure and then it leaves it open to like a movie. Like you'd say, okay,
Yeah.
this is a good movie. Are they going to do a sequel or not? Right. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I approach these projects.
Yeah.
Um, is I'll put them through an adventure and there'll be, there'll be a payoff and everything so that the story can end right there. If people are like, I don't want to see any more of this, or it leaves the door open that I can do, okay, here's the next adventure if people want to see more. So Warriors of the Light, that it's a complete thing. It's kind of
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings in the sense that, Sauron gets destroyed at the end and everybody's happy and that's it. That's the end of the story.
Hmm.
So they have to go back and do prequels, because that's the only place that there's story room. There's nothing you can do moving forward because everything's changed. And so it's one of those type of situations where it's a singular adventure that ends and pays off.
Hmm.
And then the only way to do anything else would be to do, like I said, prequels to it. So,
Oh,
um,
I would ask about the Lord of the Rings and how you got into that, but it's getting up to 1 o'clock, and I figure you probably need to get something to eat before you go to professionals. And
that's right. I actually got to do some work or I go
yes,
wash the dishes or something.
so I'm gonna let you go. It was nice chatting with you,
Thank you, April,
and
for having me on. I appreciate it.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Was it?
I will try to have this up, and by the end of the day, I'm just gonna make like the title card and then
Okay.
get it up. So
Yeah, well, send me the link when you get it set up. So I'll
I
check
will.
it out. I'll tell everybody about it. So,
Hmm.
all righty. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice
All right.
day.
You
Oh,
too.
you
We'll
can't
talk to
see.
you later.
Thank you.
Bye bye.